Think your favorite war movie shows you what combat was really like. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in an actual historical battle. Hollywood has lied to us for decades. On screen, soldiers are brave, duels are epic, and every arrow hits its target. In reality, battles were confusing, terrifying, filthy, and often decided by disease, hunger, or fear before swords even clashed. Today, we're going deep into the truth about real warfare, from ancient Greece to World War I. By the end, you'll never see a war movie the same way again. The phalanx myth Hollywood loves heroic warriors sprinting into battle like superheroes. But in ancient Greece, the phalanx ruled the battlefield. Imagine rows of men, shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears bristling forward. Each shield weighed 15 pounds, each spear 8 feet long. Soldiers packed so tightly they could barely move individually. When two phalanxes met, it wasn't cinematic chaos. It was a human wall pressing against another, while the back ranks shoved forward with all their might. Movies never show the terror, vision blocked by a bronze helmet, the deafening clash of metal, the stink of sweat, fear, and blood. Your shield arm would ache, your legs would tremble, one stumble and the man behind crushed you. And here's the real shock. Most battles weren't won by brute strength. They ended when one side broke formation from fear or exhaustion. Victory often came not from killing the enemy, but from making them run. Rome and the legion, if the phalanx was about unity, the Romans took discipline to the next level. Hollywood shows Romans fighting dramatic duels. In truth, the legion was a machine. Soldiers trained daily to move as one. They carried the scutum shield, nearly 20 pounds, and a short stabbing sword, the gladius. They didn't hack wildly. They stabbed in unison, 3 inches deep, over and over, behind a wall of shields. It was efficient, terrifying, and utterly uncinematic. The Romans also perfected rotation. The front line fought briefly, then stepped back while fresh soldiers rotated forward. Imagine fighting men who never seemed to tire because they constantly swapped ranks. And again, battles weren't about single heroes. They were about formations, morale, and grinding pressure until the enemy collapsed. Medieval combat reality fast forward to the Middle Ages. Hollywood shows knights riding out for glorious duels. Reality? Stay in formation or die. Cavalry charges weren't reckless. Hundreds of armored knights thundered forward only when the enemy was already weakened. They aimed for weak spots, and if one knight broke formation, he was cut down instantly. Infantry used just as much discipline. English longbowmen fired in volleys, raining thousands of arrows. At Agincourt, they drove stakes into the ground to stop French cavalry. Not heroic duels, just brutal engineering. And here's something movies always skip. Disease killed far more soldiers than swords. Dysentery, infected wounds, and starvation wiped out armies before battle even began. Most medieval wars were sieges. Months of digging trenches, building siege engines, and starving castles. No glory, just mud, hunger, and boredom. Mongols and steppe warfare now. Let's step out of Europe. The Mongols rewrote warfare itself. Hollywood never shows their brilliance. Instead of chaotic charges, Mongols used mobility and deception. They'd ride forward, fire arrows, then fake retreat. Enemy soldiers chased them, straight into ambushes. Their archery was terrifying. Shooting from horseback at full speed, Mongol arrows cut down enemies long before melee began. Entire armies collapsed without ever getting close. And logistics. The Mongols carried dried meat and milk, slept in their saddles, and used relay riders for communication. They didn't just win battles. They crushed entire kingdoms through planning and endurance. Early gunpowder and real musket fire. Hollywood loves musketeers hitting every shot. The truth, musket accuracy was awful. Smoothbore muskets could barely hit a man at 80 yards. That's why soldiers fired in volleys. Hundreds of guns at once, hoping some bullets landed. Reloading took 20 seconds under fire. In that time, the enemy might be charging you. Smoke filled the battlefield, blinding both sides. Soldiers often couldn't even see who they were shooting at, and the wounds horrific. Musket balls shattered bones and ripped flesh, leaving agonizing injuries that medieval surgeons barely knew how to treat. Napoleonic and 18th century battles. Napoleonic wars looked glamorous on screen. Lines of soldiers marching with drums and flags. In reality, Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder while cannonballs ripped men apart. Soldiers weren't heroes, they were terrified. Whole ranks obliterated in seconds, yet discipline forced them to reload, march, and fire again. Morale was everything. If one unit broke, panic spread like wildfire. The sight of comrades running often ended a battle faster than bullets. Trench warfare and WWI now to the modern nightmare, World War I. Hollywood often skips the boredom, mud, and sheer misery of trenches. In reality, soldiers spent weeks in freezing mud, surrounded by rats, lice, and corpses. The stench of unburied bodies was constant. Shellfire pounded trenches day and night, shattering nerves. Movies showed dramatic charges over the top. In truth, these assaults were suicide. Men advanced slowly, tangled in barbed wire, mowed down by machine guns. Entire units wiped out in minutes. Chemical weapons added new terror. Chlorine and mustard gas blinded, choked, and burned soldiers alive. And again, most died not in glorious combat, but from disease, exhaustion, and trauma. The psychology of combat here's what Hollywood almost never shows: the human mind breaking under war. Studies from World War II revealed only 20% of soldiers fired their weapons at the enemy. Most froze or fired blindly. The instinct not to kill is powerful, and training only partly overcame it. Fear, confusion, and sensory overload dominated. The sound of thousands shouting, cannons booming, horses screaming, wounded crying. It was overwhelming. Many soldiers collapsed mentally before physically. PTSD isn't new. Ancient sources describe men trembling uncontrollably, unable to fight. They called it battle shock. Today we'd call it shell shock or post-traumatic stress. Weapons and armor truth movies love swords. In reality, most soldiers used cheap weapons, spears, axes, even farming tools. Swords were rare, expensive, and practical, not flashy. Fighting wasn't about 10-minute duels. It was short, brutal, efficient. Manuals describe ugly tricks: tripping, grappling, smashing with pommels. Armor, too, is misunderstood. Most wore padded cloth or leather. Plate armor was for the elite. And while it stopped cuts, it didn't stop blunt trauma. Maces and hammers caved in helmets. Combat was messy, fast, and terrifying. Nothing like Hollywood's choreographed swordplay. Logistics, the true decider here, is the biggest secret. Most wars weren't decided on the battlefield at all. They were decided by logistics. Armies marched on stomachs, without food. Soldiers deserted or died. Diseases like dysentery and typhus killed far more men than weapons ever did. Victories often came from supply lines, not swords. Armies that could feed their men won. Armies that couldn't vanished. The final truth, so here's the reality Hollywood hides. Real combat wasn't glorious. It wasn't endless duels or perfect shots. It was formation, fear, exhaustion, and chaos. It was disease, hunger, and logistics. It was brutal, ugly, and deeply human. The survivors weren't the strongest. They weren't the bravest. They were the luckiest. Understanding this truth doesn't make war less meaningful. It makes the sacrifice of soldiers across history even greater, because they endured something no movie can ever truly capture. If this video opened your eyes, subscribe for more myth-busting history. And if you want to see the disgusting reality of daily life in the Middle Ages, click here.